Alright, hello everyone. Welcome to the inaugural episode of my game design series, which I'm going to be calling Design Deconstructed. Um, it's something that I've been wanting to do for a while, so I'm hoping that you all find value in this as much as I do. And what I'm going to be doing is taking a deep dive into some games, mechanics, maps, levels, systems, anything that sort of piques my fancy, and something that I think would add value to the conversation around game development and design. Um, for my first episode, and probably for the first several episodes, I thought it'd be probably appropriate to take a deep dive look at some of the content that I've made for Guild Wars 2. Not only is it something that I can have a lot of say about right off the bat, but I think it helps raise my level of my design portfolio. And given that I'm still currently looking for work at the moment, I'm not employed. Anything I can do there to kind of boost my signal and get some stuff out there. I have a design portfolio, but a lot of the stuff on there is showing my content through the eyes of streamers, which isn't a bad thing, but I think being able to give an insider view, almost developer's commentary kind of series, would actually help with that. So yeah, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds right now. I'm still sort of toying with this idea. Hopefully it's something that you guys will find value in, and if so, this will continue to grow. But for right now, and I can talk more about it when that happens, but for right now, let's just jump right into it. Let's go to, I'm going to start with the story chapter from Living World Season 2, Episode 8, which was entitled Arcana Obscura. So let's go ahead and jump into the game, and we'll just go from there. So I'm going to play this on my main character, Barefoot Contessa. Yes, most of my characters are named Barefoot of some kind, and they are Barefoot in game because that's my brand. She's a mesmer. She is not spec'd out to be super intense. I don't get a lot into the design of builds. I kind of just go with what feels good, what is good for me, for my playstyle, what feels right. I'm not really concerned a lot with equipment and stuff like that. So like I've got exotics on her. There's nothing particularly exciting about her as a character. You know, I'm sure people will screenshot this and laugh at these numbers. That's fine. I do that deliberately, though. That's one of the things that, as a game designer, especially for the content that you're building, one of the important things is to play it from the perspective of somebody who does not play hardcore. Um, there are definitely things out there like raids where that is important, and those guys can play with like the max ascended gear or legendary armor or whatever. I don't do that because I want to make sure that my content is approachable to anybody who gets to the maximum level of the game. And by level 80, everyone should have exotics because you mostly get a full set of that stuff from just playing through the story, playing through the maps. So, yeah, this character is full exotic, so she's not gonna be super OP. Her DPS is certainly not very high, which I picked her for this series because it gives me a chance to kind of plink away at enemies while I can talk and give me a little bit more time. If I was playing, for example, my Daredevil, I'd probably chew through content and then stand around a lot while I talked about stuff. Anyway, yeah. So let's talk about this episode. Let's get into the instance. So the first thing I'll talk about is the name Arcana Obscura. It was a direct callback to a previous episode in episode 5, I believe it was, Echoes of the Past. There was a story chapter called Hidden Arcana, in which it introduced this sort of special collections area of the German Empire, which was the research wing of the scholarly order that we have in our game. So yeah, let's see. This chapter was pulled together pretty quickly, all things considered. It was a late ad. I wasn't on the team at the time. I was doing something else. I believe I was finishing up one of the. Um, I think I was doing one of the Festival of the Four Winds releases, actually. Um, and this team had, I can't remember if they had fallen behind and needed help or they were moving somebody off the team, but there was a need to have somebody who had built story instances come in and kind of put this together in a very quick amount of time. All told, I had 6 weeks to put this together, which sounds like a lot, but it actually isn't. In particular with story, when you're dealing with story content, it's the kind of content that gets a lot of iterative feedback. And you're never really ever done until you're ready to ship. You could draw story content out indefinitely if you wanted to, just because there are so many things that players are interested in. And we were continuing to raise the bar on our storytelling. And so it was something that 6 weeks seemed like a very tight timeline for me. I worked on this with Bobby Stein, who is the associate narrative director now. Then he was the lead writer. Basically, Bobby just handed me a script, and I went to town. That's not our normal process. Usually the designer and the writer get together and we talk through stuff and plot it out. But because of the way that this had to come together quickly, Bobby had already gone through and put on his narrative design hat and put together the outline and everything. And really my job was just to come in and implement it and add the gameplay and make sure everything was set up the way that it was spec'd out in the design document. Because of that development cycle, it also had very little time for resources. I had very little to work with. I had to beg, borrow, and steal pretty much everything I could. I would say about a third of the VO in this release is recycled VO that I stole from other content. Our design tool had a neat search feature where I went through and I looked for any line that wasn't referenced or any line that was only referenced a couple times so that it wasn't like something that was really obvious. And then I basically just curated that list and came up with a list of things that I could reuse. One of them is this character Gix, who I threw in here just as a cameo because I found a pretty funny line that didn't appear to be used anywhere else, where he talks about Balthazar, who is one of the human gods, and he has trouble pronouncing the guy's name because Balthazar is kind of a mouthful, especially for Asura, who seem, all Asura names are extremely short. They're usually one syllable, maybe two. And so Balthazar, 3 syllables, but it's also just kind of a mouthful. And he has a joke about that where he's mispronouncing it and also believes that he is not the god of war, but rather the god of brutal dentistry, which is hilarious. So that's why I had to put that in there. So let's go talk to sous chef Seymour. I didn't even know how to pronounce that guy's name. Seymour Oxbone. This character was included because he also had a bit of a funny history here. During season 2, he was introduced, and his big selling point, or his big sort of thing that made him popular with fans, was that he was trying to find a culinary use for bloodstone dust, and he was upset that nobody could find one. He was convinced that you could ingest bloodstone dust without it killing you. He is absolutely wrong, but give the guy credit, he was always trying. So yeah, we'll talk to him. He has a little bit of an extra added thing here. If you talk to him after you've talked to him for his quest completion thing, you can take a sample of his bloodstone dust entree and it will give you a horrible debuff, and that's tied to some achievements, so you'd have to do this content with that debuff on you to unlock some of these achievements. No culinary application is the name of it. Yeah, I'm not going to do that here because it would just make things harder, and I'm not here to make life difficult for myself. So Yeah, he was not part of the original design plan. Like I say, he was. I added him because of his popularity at the time, and also because I needed some good hook to attach the achievements to, and that seemed like a fun one for me. Let's enter the library here. It's a secret place, so you have to obviously go into the magic fireplace and get teleported. A little nod to Harry Potter there with the whole thing. Yeah, we are definitely instructed at reading that, or we were, not to have a lot of pop culture references. So we try to keep it to a minimum. That was one of those that I thought was neat. Where it's sort of a reference, but only to people who understand both, and we don't ever reference it. And hey, magic fireplaces exist everywhere in probably fantasy media of some kind. So yeah, yeah. Let's talk for a second here about Marjorie. So we get to talk to Marjorie here. She tells us that we're looking for something that so I guess just set up the story real quick. So in the previous chapters, what we found is we had one of our longtime characters, Kaith, had stolen an egg, which would later become the hatchling, the dragon hatchling Aurine. But we don't know that at this point. We just know it's an important thing that the Master of Peace tried to give to us, and Kaith intercepted it and stole it and ran away. And she ran into this place in the desert, in the western Maguma Desert, with a magical symbol on it, and so it's warded and you can't enter. And so we are here at Special Collections because Ogden Stonehealer, who is a dwarf who lives and works at the Derwent Priory, has a lot of expertise in ancient things because he is ancient himself. He's from the time of Guild Wars 1. He's one of the few remaining, maybe the only remaining sentient creature from that time period because he was turned to stone. And so he has some information that we need. And Marjorie is our sort of investigator character. She's a Canthan character who we met very early on in Season 1, has been with us for quite some time. And she is sort of a hard-boiled noir detective. It's her archetype. And she is here to help us sort of do this investigation because we need to find out something about this symbol to hopefully get us inside the cave. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, what I was going to say before I went into the story stuff was Season 2 had a really interesting challenge, which is that the PC character, your character, was not able to speak. There were a number of reasons for that. One was budgeting, one was scheduling, trying to wrangle all the 10 voice actors that we have for the main character is not easy. And by Season 2, we had not quite had the system down in place to be able to do that. We were still in the process of formulating a lot of that. And also, we didn't have the tech that we needed to have the player speak. So there was just too many obstacles. But that put a lot of onus on the characters that were next to the player characters. So Marjorie did a lot of speaking on behalf of the player. Casimir would do a lot of speaking on behalf of the player. We tried to give your iconic crew sort of they'd put our words in their mouths. It's not an easy thing to do. I don't envy games where players aren't able to speak because as players being able to speak brings up a lot of other things that are difficult to wrangle with, namely that does my character speak in the way that I want them to speak, especially when your character can appear any way that you want them to look, and players will invest themselves in the character and think, well, my character is personality trait X or Y, and if the player commander character that we write does not match that, it creates a disconnect. So that's problematic, but I think for us it was definitely a better situation to be able to have the player speaking and give a voice to this character. But in this season we did not have that. So I got creative. I did a lot of layering in this chapter where I was layering VO into text conversation and then back out to VO, so that we give the player an option to speak in those voiced conversations without them actually being voiced. The other thing, one of the neat little things that I did for this chapter that I didn't do for other content, because it's kind of a hairy proposition to do every single time, but because we only had the one sort of ally character here, if you talk to Marjorie at key points throughout the story, her dialogue will change at each stage to represent that she's following along with you. I did that because Marjorie is specifically in this chapter designed to be a helping character. She's designed to be sort of a guidepost for the player, and so I wanted to make sure that she recognized almost every state. You can't do everything because, you know, there are text limits and budgets that we have to do, and so I tried to do as many as made sense for the character. Yeah. All right. So one other quick fun thing before we get into the content, because I know I've been rambling on and talking a lot and not playing. So this is a little callback. If you dance in front of this statue of Abaddon, you die. You get killed. Abaddon does not like dancing, and he punishes anyone who tries to have fun in front of him. This is a callback to Guild Wars 1. Where at the end of Nightfall, when you battle Abaddon, you could use the slash dance emote in front of him, and he would do the killing blow on you, because he is so not fun. All right, so let's get in here. Marjorie has key things that she says along the way. Here's another example of an NPC who was added specifically because of comedy value, but also because I found these great lines. This was a character that was voiced by the great John DiMaggio. At this point, he wasn't playing any of our sort of major characters. He was doing some bit roles, and he did this Norn sort of library keeper, and he had like 5 or 6 different versions of and you know, it was so hilarious that I had to add that. I think it had been used in the previous episode content where we were in this space, but I wanted to, you know, continue to have that character show up. All right, so let's go talk to Ogden. Ogden is an interesting character, and sorry for if you're looking to like enjoy the story of this, I encourage you to play it. I'm going to be talking over it a lot, so you're probably going to miss key details of the story part, which might seem strange, but this is not a story specific stream. This is more for design and developer insight. So I'm going to skip through, you know, the story part. You can follow along as you will. Ogden is an interesting challenge because he, as I mentioned before, he is one of our more sort of ancient characters. He has a lot of deep history. He dates back to Guild Wars 1. And so anytime you want to explore that kind of history, he seems like a good go-to character to use. The only downside to him is he has no animation rig, or he has an animation rig built into him, but there's no animations on it. So he literally can't move. So anytime you want to use Ogden, he has to be standing around, which is not good. It really makes it challenging to use him, and we use him way more than I think we should, or maybe that is an argument for why we should have had our animators spend some time, you know, giving him at least a walk cycle. He has nothing. He can only stand there and idle. And yeah, so, all right. Ogden has given us a task to go search for a tome about the Forgotten and the Divine Fire. From a design standpoint, I'm gonna raise an issue that I've had with our game, which I don't envy players to have to figure out, which is if you see this green box marker, this is an indication of, hey, this is where you need to search. But here's the problem. We have a map that doesn't have an adequate system for showing floors. So is it here? No, it's not. The item that you're looking for is upstairs, but we have no way to indicate that in our game, unfortunately. That's one of the things that for a long time has plagued us. How we handle multiple levels is a pain. I wish that we had a way for us to set markers on a floor so that this marker wouldn't show up until you got up the stairs. I wish that we had ways to more adequately breadcrumb you. And that's not to say that we couldn't have done that. I could have put an arrow marker, and then the arrow could have swapped to the square once you got up to this top floor. In hindsight, that's what I would have done. I think even though the arrow would have been helpful, the arrow doesn't really, like, you don't see a staircase on this map anywhere. So I still think that there's a lot of challenges with the way our game renders floors and levels on maps. And it doesn't help that when we had special, let me open up the world map here, when we have special areas like this that were not part of the original design plan for the world, we had to basically shove them off into a corner of what we internally called the mists. Basically, this map doesn't exist anywhere in the world. And so it has this special, sort of like foggy underground texture. It's not ideal. It does not make things easy to read. So it's one of the design challenges we had to work around. I think we've done, I would say, the best that we can without getting new tech to support that. Yeah. Anyway. Let's go look for this book. One of the things I'll talk about while I'm doing my search, because I don't remember where the book is. Muscle memory. I went right to the section where I needed to go. Yeah, if you look at these, one of the neat things that I tried to add for this chapter that was not part of the original design plan was Marjorie would give you hints, because I wanted this. I wanted this whole scavenger hunt for books to feel like you really had to go look. In part because in the previous episode release of this library area, people really got into reading all these books. They were full of lore. They were little neat tidbits of the world, and I wanted players to have to explore and not just point and put a green star on something that the player and the commander would have no idea where exactly it is. So if you notice, as you're going around and examining stuff, Marjorie chimes in and she says, "Nope, that's not it," or "Where can we find a book about dispelling barriers?" So she's sort of giving you subtle hints. I mean, I picked this up from every video game ever that has companion characters, so it's not anything innovative, but it is something that we didn't do much in Guild Wars 2, and so I wanted to add that layer to this because I wanted to keep it from being frustrating. There's a couple other things in here. This Norn, if you see a drunk or passed out Norn, chances are it's something important, because that's what I put. Anywhere I have a really important thing, there's usually a drunk Norn nearby. I actually had a really cool whole backstory and history for this guy that tied him to the commander. Basically, he is, right now he's a member of the Durban Priory, but my story for him was that he basically joined the Durban Priory, then went to the Vigil, and then went to the Order of Whispers, because he was trying to follow along in the commander, and everywhere the commander went, he did something dumb and got fired, and he blames the commander for being inspired by their example. Anyway, he's a super non-important background character, but I always try to put him in anywhere that I can. He's also shows up in episode 5, rather, sorry, of this current season, Living World Season 4. He's behind a stack. He's behind some stacks. Now he's, at present day in Tyria, he is no longer with any of the orders, and has been fired from all of them, and has now just taken to getting drunk. Anyway, sorry, that's so not important, and I'm getting hung up on it. So let's move on. Let's see. Oh, yes. So this Fire of the Gods is the book that we're looking for. If you can hear, I'll try to talk a little bit quieter. You might have already heard it. I had audio team put in a custom audio cue for that so that it would be a little easier to find. Again, trying to make every effort I can to give the player lots of hints about where the thing is that they need to look, so that you don't have to spend a lot of time digging around. So this is the book that we need, so let's take it. Yeah, let me take it back down to Ogden. I thought it was important that we establish up front that this is not a book that just goes into your inventory or anything like you. Literally, it's a big book. You have to carry it around both hands because it's heavy. It's full of dense stuff. And it also helps establish that later on, when we give the book to Marjorie, she does the same thing. She holds it in her hands, and then it makes it impossible for you to do anything. I wanted to do this because it locks your skill bar, which means you can't fight. Which explains why later, when Marjorie is holding the book, she doesn't help you fight. Because that's one of the pieces of feedback I got early on, is that you'll find out later when you go into combat, Marjorie is just standing around with a book. And people were like, well, why is she just standing around? And I'm saying, well, because she's holding a bundle item like Ed player would hold a bundle item, and yes, she could put it down and fight, which we could do. But then you're leaving the book around while enemies are nearby, and I didn't think that would be appropriate. So I tried to establish up front that, hey, the player picks up the book, they lose their skills. When Marjorie picks up the book, she loses her skills. Just again, to have that sort of mental connection and continuity. So we give the book to Ogden. Unfortunately, I couldn't put the book in Ogden's hands because, again, Ogden has no animations. So pretend he's holding a book. That was one of those. That's one of those development concessions you just kind of have to make. As much as I would love to have had somebody give me even just a really basic hold animation for him, we just did not have the time to get that. All right, so now we are looking for 3 relics from Turai Asa's past. He is a character that also dates back to Guild Wars 1. Very important character, helped characters ascend, which was a process of getting to maximum level in Guild Wars 1. So this whole chapter is a huge callback to Guild Wars 1. You can hear the same audio cue on the maps, on the items that you need for this next part of the scavenger hunt. And again, Marjorie also continues to chime in on the items that you find. Yeah, there was so much opportunity here to explore old lore and world building and that kind of stuff. And this is the kind of stuff I love to do. So I was so excited to be given this instance to build. This is exactly right up my alley. So we've got to go find 2 more things here. 2 more artifacts. I'm just going to go right to them. I'm not going to, consider this a spoiler-laden episode. If you were looking for a quick walkthrough, this is it. Except I can't jump, apparently. I am very rusty with this game. I haven't really played since the layoffs, unfortunately. It's, I think, been a process for me of healing and taking some time and needing a little distance from this place. Tyria was my world for 16 years, and I still love it. I still think of it as second home in a lot of ways, but yeah, I think I needed some time. Here's an example where I break my own rules. It's a designer's prerogative, I guess. Here's a book that's just as big, if not bigger, than the one that we have before. And this one you do just take and it disappears into your magic sack. But again, that one I was okay with because you're not needing it. You don't need to hold it. You don't need to have it. Whereas the other book you actually do need to have later as a reference guide. A lot of these items and a lot of this like flavor text and stuff where you click on and you discover stuff was late additions, and probably drove the editing team mad because we are famous in the design department for kind of pushing the boundaries. you know, I mean, it's a rich, dense world, and players, I think, have come to expect kind of a rich, dense setup where you got to have lots of things to click on, lots of things to explore, but that does mean a lot of extra work for people. I just want to show this real quick. No, I'm not sure how many players found this, but there's a little secret strange crate back here with some artifacts. Yeah, Guild Wars 1, Guild Wars 2 players will be able to wiki that and find out what it is. I'm not going to spoil it here, because I think it's pretty cool. It's a neat little Easter egg secret. That was put in by Gwen, one of our prop and environment artists. She was like she's a super amazing artist and huge fan of the game, and was like, Matthew, do you mind if we put this here? And I'm like, yeah, please, go ahead. I'm all about that hidden stuff, taking advantage of the wonky collision here. So this is the last item. Again, Marjorie giving her helpful hints that we've done the right thing, hit the right spots. Yeah, I mean, I really like sort of games that do that whole hot potato, cold potato thing when you're on the hunt for something. I grew up on it, all those Sierra adventure games where it was just a pixel hunt, and I mean, I've been tortured by that so many times by games, and it drives me batty. So I prefer to give players a little bit more than just find the thing in a big swoop or whatever. Yeah. Right. So we've got Talk to Ogden again. Talks about this. So this was a cinematic that was added. It was not part of the plan. I was getting into playing with the cinematic tool, and I was like, well, we have this moment that technically takes place off screen that we can either have players completely miss, which would be terrible, or we force them to go upstairs, which would mean that I'd have to do a whole bunch of setup right in front of the player, which I never really like doing, because it's sort of like the whole smoke and mirrors thing. So we had that happen, and it also helped call attention to the fact that the environment zone changes, because the environment zone change is pretty subtle. If you're not paying strict attention to it, it might not seem like much, but we wanted to give this library kind of a ghostly, foggy, echoey feel, because what we've done is by activating the seal in the book, or breaking the seal in the book, we've activated some magical echo ritual where it's created these echoes of the past that we can now follow around, and they basically are replaying. This is sort of like a memory book, I guess, if you want to call it that. It's replaying the history of Guild Wars 1, and specifically the 3 Ascension rituals. So if you are not aware, there were 3 rituals that you did in the Crystal Desert in Guild Wars 1, which would help you, quote-unquote, ascend, which is you reached max level and you can now see the Mersat, who were a hidden race of creatures. And so you accompanied this character, Turai Asa, on these quests. He was also called the Ghostly Hero. And each of these areas was specifically designed in Guild Wars 1 to basically be a example or a sort of tutorial, if you will, in a way, of PvP. Because that was the intent for Guild Wars 1, is that you play through Guild Wars 1, get to the end of your story, hit max level, which was 20, and then everyone goes off to PvP together. That was the theory, is that that's what people would be doing. I think the reality turned out a little bit differently. I think that PvP was definitely a very active part of the game, but there was definitely a lot of divide between PvP and PvE players even back then. So I don't know how well this worked as a way to get PvE players into PvP back in the day. But anyway, I did the exact thing here that we did in Guild Wars 1. I wasn't a designer in Guild Wars 1, so I can't say we did any of that, because I was just a prop artist. But yeah, since it's a callback, I wanted each of these to have exactly the same, setup. So this was a thing that taught players how to take and hold capture points. Basic premise, but yeah, it was a key thing for Guild Wars 1 PvP. So that was why this first one, the Throne of Palentia, which I got this ghostly version of the throne. I don't know why we called this a throne, but you know, Guild Wars 1 was even more strapped for assets and resources than Guild Wars 2 ever was. So, you know, we were pretty creative in our license to rename or dub things. So yeah, word about balance, because we're now in combat. I deliberately made this content harder than a typical story chapter would be. And I did that because it's a callback to Guild Wars 1, which in my view was a much harder game than Guild Wars 2, by far. Because Guild Wars 1 relied a lot on having really, really good builds. Again, it was training. Guild Wars 1 design was training you for PvP, which is hard. PvP is not easy. PvP, you're playing against players. Players have access to all the best skills, the best gear. So we deliberately made Guild Wars 1 harder experience, and so I wanted to have this be a slightly harder experience. I didn't want to go full on, like, you know, you're going to get murdered and have to, like, run back to the spawn point and, you know, all that. Like, I didn't want this to feel completely over the top, but it is harder than a typical story chapter. The enemies, in particular, the enemies hit much harder than typical story enemies are allowed to hit. These guys can do, I think, between 30 and 50% damage per hit. So if you get hit, you know, enough times in succession, you go down pretty easily. I mean, that's probably their crit value. I don't think they hit like that every time. But they also throw on a bunch of effects. You know, you got the worms back there throwing knockdowns on you. So, like, there's a lot to contend with in this particular setup. These echoes are an army that I built, which I don't usually ever do. It's not my thing. I'm not a big systems designer. I like content. I much prefer that. I don't think I'm particularly good at systems design. I think that requires a very particular set of skills and a mindset that I don't possess, because I like things on the easier side. I like things to be kind of breezy and fun, and I don't like getting to the nitty-gritty of, you know, having to police people's skills and, you know, make this kind of content. But there wasn't anybody else to do it, so I had to step up, and so I made this Echo army. I patterned them all. If you're aware of Guild Wars 1, you'll probably recognize I patterned them all on Guild Wars 1 enemies, specifically the Forgotten, because we're dealing with Crystal Desert content. The Forgotten were one of the chief enemies that we had in the Crystal Desert in Guild Wars 1, so I figured that would be appropriate to have these echoes feel like Forgotten. So they do a lot of things that Guild Wars 1 classes were able to do. We should be capturing this point here in this next round, go around, before anything else spawns. Yeah, and then once we capture this, Torai Asa goes through his spiel. Gives a little bow, because he's an honorable dude. And Marjorie, again, here is our helper, so she's got the book. The story here is that she's got the book because she's sort of guiding this magical ritual. That we need to keep the book open for the ritual to continue. If she closed the book or put the book down, that's another reason why she couldn't put it down. My guess would be that the ritual would stop and, you know, would restart the next time you open the book, or broke the seal. And I think the concern would be, you know, you broke a seal, so, like, could it even be rerun? Or, yeah. So I think the rationale of us keeping her with the book makes good sense here. Yeah, so now we're on to the second ritual, where we have to purify unclean or tainted spirits, which was, again, patterned on a lot of Guild Wars 1. There was a specific mission. I don't remember the names of the missions right off the top of my head. I do apologize. I'm sure a lot of the people who follow me expect me to have lower expertise will cry foul and tell me how casual I am. But you know, this challenge was designed to teach players, you know, take and sort of the opposite of you're gaining ground and then holding it. Not even holding it. You're just gaining ground. So you're making your way through these tainted spirits to get to a ritual area down at the end where Turiasa will cleanse us, cleanse the people who come with him, because he was a pilgrim who led a number of people through the Crystal Desert in order to ascend. So that's what he's doing for us here too. He's leading us on a pilgrimage, basically, to ascend. We will not actually be ascending because, again, this is an echo of a ritual. It is not the actual ritual. It's sort of a way for them to relive history without, having the magical consequences of that. Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to think of anything else I can talk about while we're here, or just get to the end of this. Yeah. Now we'll just go through this. These enemies, as I say, are tougher than normal story enemies. It was really a challenge to get this balance right. I think I got it pretty well. But like this guy healed up. Normally you don't see enemies doing that. That is a thing that Guild Wars 1 enemies did. So like I tried to make concessions to make it feel like something different, something that you don't normally get in Guild Wars 2 combat. I don't know how well I succeeded. I haven't seen a whole lot of feedback on this chapter. I didn't specifically go looking for it because of the timetable and how quickly it had to come together. As soon as I was done with this, I moved right back on to my other things that I had to get done. So I didn't have the time to spend. Anyway, now we have been cleansed. Turiasa puts some buffs on us. He puts a purified. So now, while we have this on, we're immune to conditions and we regenerate health for 5 minutes, which is nice for the rest of the instance, because I think the rest of the instance takes about 5 minutes. I think I timed it out. It might be longer. It might be that I could have extended this buff out longer. I don't know. That's one of those things that if I had infinite time to go back and playtest this, I would have fine-tuned that quite a bit more. But alright, so now we're on the third ritual. This third ritual tasks us with, there are the vision crystals which we have to go collect and bring back to the pedestal. That too was a PvP mode where you basically capture the flag kind of a thing. And so this was our way of teaching capture the flag, was this Crystal Desert ritual. So I'm doing that here again. Same deal, same enemies. Nothing really new to talk about here, other than I think I structured each of these slightly differently. So I think this one is more magical abilities, more magic-y using enemies. So you have a lot of spells and fire and rock armor and that kind of stuff. So again, each of them tried to. So there's like elementalists, mesmers, and well, I was going to say guardians, but we didn't have guardians in Guild Wars 1, so they're probably monks. Because that's what we had in Guild Wars 1. Monks were healing class, what we no longer have in Guild Wars 2, because everybody is responsible for their own healing for the most part. Although that we've kind of softened that stance since the early days of Guild Wars 2 development. We tried in the initial run through to eliminate the Holy Trinity. I don't know that that was really entirely possible, because I think players do like playing a role to some degree. Alright, so we drop this crystal here. The intent behind this design work too is also, as you have seen, this is not a big space, and yet we had a lot of storytelling to get done. So I did everything I could, tried every trick in the book to maximize my use of this space. There's not a lot of space here. Oh, really bad placing that. So yeah, I tried to get every corner, every nook of this space involved. It does make for some hairier encounters because in these tight quarters where you got camera bumping up against things, it can be kind of a pain. Yeah. In fact, I do remember somebody telling me, "Don't put combat in this space. It's too hard. It's too enclosed." I don't disagree. I'm nothing if not persistent, though, in breaking rules every chance I can. So I did. I think it works. I don't think it's terrible, personally. If I could go back and change anything about this, I probably would have requested this outer ring, this ArenaNet. I always call this the ArenaNet logo. Because it looks like the ArenaNet logo. I would have loved a way to have lowered that down into the floor to give you a little bit more space on the ground. Because right now, this is the big thing, right? As you can see the camera here bumping up against this thing, which is a big pain. Because you can walk under it and dodge roll under it. So it does create a lot of problems. You kind of have to back up and kite enemies back here into the hall so that you have a little bit more open space around here. I don't think that's terrible. I think forcing players to utilize the space and make smart choices about where you fight, I think is not a bad thing. Get with the hammer. This is one of those cases where I would curse myself out as a designer because I'd be like, "Who the hell designed this stupid knockdown to be so prevalent?" All right, Virtuous Echo. This is the veteran version of the monk. So he's a bit soft and squishy because monks were kind of soft and squishy, but they could heal. But since there's nobody here to heal, he doesn't really have much usefulness. Let's talk about. I'm normally not a huge fan of timed interacts where you have to hold, a thing down or you have to wait while the player does an animation. I'm not a big fan of that. I much prefer just hitting F and interacting and picking up the item because it doesn't really make sense. This was one where I kind of saw it as, well, these are magical things, and again, it's trying to simulate capture the flag, which is harder to do in a PvP environment, and so I could have done it one of two ways. One was you get, well, I'll put it this way: we wanted to have the player get knocked out of something if you got attacked. So to promote the idea that the player needed to clear... Oh, this is a nice little bug. Cute. This is what happens when you don't play your content for years on end, and then you come back to it and you realize, oh, Turayasa is still crafting, which is the emote that he's doing. He's crafting. Yeah, we have a bug in our game where sometimes emotes take way longer than they should, and that was the case right there. So he's crafted the vision crystal, he's assembled the vision crystal, and that spawns the torch of divine fire. Yay, we've succeeded. Anyway, yeah, what was I talking about before? Oh, now I got all mixed up. Excellent. All right, well, I'm just going to move on then. I'm sure it will come back to me, and if not, it probably wasn't that important. So we're going to take the divine fire down here, back to Ogden. Before I talk to Ogden, I'm going to highlight another thing. So you will have noticed that as the Scavenger Hunt ended, all the interactives, which I have turned on by default because I like to see things, have turned off with the exception of this old mirror. And I did this old mirror here because I wanted to have yet another callback to the Crystal Desert and the whole Ascension process, which is once you completed the 3 rituals and you got the Divine Fire, you entered in the Crystal Desert this place, this mesa, where you had the Hall of Ascension. And in order to be ascended, you had to defeat your doppelganger. And it was a way of, again, promoting PvP by saying, hey, you're going to play against a player. In this case, it's you. Where in Guild Wars 1, they would take your skills, your gear, your character, and they would duplicate it, and you would have to fight a dark shadow version of yourself. And they would use your skills, and they would use, all the tricks and the traits that you had to the best of the AI's ability. And so I wanted to have a huge callback to that as well. So this is a nice little Easter egg, where if you have the Divine Fire, you get this extra conversation option where you can say, hold the Divine Fire up to the mirror breaks, it spawns a doppelganger of yourself, and now you have to fight yourself. It is your character appearance. I didn't have the shadowy stuff at the time, so I chose a sort of dark, almost glass looking, because again, it's a mirror, so I wanted to feel like, if you've watched Young Sherlock Holmes, that old movie, I say old, one of the greatest early CG examples was there was this mirror that broke apart and it reformed into a figure that Sherlock Holmes, I can't remember if he had to fight it or if it was just he got chased by, but it was like this shard enemy, and I totally wanted that to look, this doppelganger to look like that, like the mirror shattered and all the glass pieces reformed to form the doppelganger that you fight. Anyway, that was a neat little Easter egg. Yeah. Let's see. I think that's pretty much it. I think we just talked to Ogden here.
Past the trials. We have what we need.
Yeah, one little note. You've noticed I've done slightly different interact things throughout this chapter. I try to do that whenever possible because I want the interactions to make sense, to where, like, if a character is waiting on the player to engage, then I make the player initiate the interaction. If it's something where Ogden, in this case, will be waiting for us to come back with a torch, it doesn't make sense for the player to have to click on him to initiate the conversation. So as soon as you get close to him with the torch, he comments on the fact that you have the torch, because that makes sense. Everywhere I can, I always try to make interactions consistent with the context of that interaction, and not just have a straight up, hey, player has to hit F to interact with everything, because that doesn't make sense. I try to follow the same rules with dialogue, where if the player is the one who's going to have the first line, or if the player is sort of needing to be the one to initiate conversation, then that's what I do. And if it feels more like, no, the NPC in this case is really eager and wants to talk to the player, then I would have that be the case. So I try to be that consistent with those rules. I can't say I'm perfect. I'm sure there are cases where I had to make concessions, but I'm pretty happy with how the interactions worked in this chapter, because I spent a fair amount of my time doing that for the 6-week run that I had on this chapter. Yeah, so that's Arcana Obscura. Chapter is over. A couple other little notes that I made to myself earlier that I wanted to call out, which is I didn't call it out at the time, but Turai Asa has VO throughout that ritual process. His VO is literally straight up word for word the dialogue from Guild Wars 1. We did that deliberately, again, to make it feel like, hey, it's an echo of the past. It's reliving history exactly as it was lived. And it was also a neat thing because in Guild Wars 1 we didn't have much VO to speak of, especially in the first game, Prophecies, where Turai Asa was featured. A lot of the dialogue in there was just straight up text in bubbles over people's heads, and we wanted to give Turai Asa a voice. Finally, I think. I'm not sure if this is these... I can't say for certainty this is the exact first use of voice for Turai Asa, but I'm pretty sure it's one of the first. I think he may have shown up in some of the PvP modes, and I can't remember when he was introduced in those. I want to say that I think Turai Asa in Wars 1 made his debut here because I definitely remember making his shield, or not making his shield because obviously I'm not an artist anymore, but I got a request in to get his custom sword and shield, uh, and then I made the composite for him based on stuff that we had. I couldn't make it exact because we don't have a lot of the pieces that he wore in Guild Wars 1 days, but I came, I think, as reasonably close as I could get. Uh, yeah, I think that's about it. So I think that's where we will stop for now and call it a day. And thank you very much, everyone, for tagging along with me and playing my chapter Arcana Obscura. And look for more of these coming in the near future. Thank you very much, and I will see you all soon.